battery cable for the positive side, the negative side, and these are going to go to the winch. This is the relay box that's going to control the winch. And if you see, it's color coded, so it makes it real easy. Blue wire is going to run to there. Yellow wire is going to run to here, and then obviously run black. And on the winch side, you're going to see the same thing. There's going to be a little paint mark on the end of each stud for the color that's supposed to go. So the blue and yellow wire will run to the winch, and these will run to the battery. Now this also has a wireless remote to it. This is the mounting hardware that they supply in the kit to mount the relay box control unit. And this is the switch mechanism, which we're not going to use. We're actually going to take this apart and we're going to convert it over to use this switch. So I've pre-wired this up because it's easier to do that, but I'm going to post up a diagram of the actual wiring for this. It's going to be your ground, your positive going to the switch, and then you're going to have your two switch controls right here. I'm not a huge fan of these connectors because they do allow some corrosion. However, the owner of the vehicle wanted to make sure that the dashboard was easily removable, so he does want to retain these instead of butt splicing them in and making it a little bit harder for him later on if he needs to access it. But what we're going to do next is we're going to disassemble the switch mechanism. And then we have this part here. And I'm going to cut all 3 wires. Now this is going to be the wiring harness that goes from this box to our switch. So the very first thing we're going to have to do to start the wiring project for the winch install is we're going to have to install this box. This is going to control the winch. This is going to be a relay and a control box. We're going to install that over here. And the reason we install this first is the geometry for everything else. Pretty much the wiring is going to be determined how much we're going to use and how we're going to do it based on where we install this. And the first part of this is we're going to have to remove this plastic cover and this lower part of the windshield to do that. Next, we're going to mount our control box, and we're going to make sure that there's not going to be anything behind it that we're going to drill into. Next, so this is where we're going to mount everything. So what we're going to do is we're going to move all these fuses and stuff out the way, so we have a clear shot of drilling our holes and we don't get caught in any of the wiring. We're going to position our box where we want it to be. So clear. So what I like to do at this point is I'm going to take one of the screws, I'm going to put it in, I'm going to use it to hold my position. And I'll start by marking my other hole. I'll take it out of the way. And at this point, we're just test fitting this box in here because we're going to have to wire everything up. And it's not going to be the most accessible right here. But again, we're just doing a basic test fit. Just make sure everything went well. Okay, let's get test well. So the next thing is we're going to pull this back out. And now what we're going to do is we're going to run our ground and our power cables from the battery. Let me show you how we're going to do that. First thing we're going to do is we're going to remove both seats. Now to run the power cables up, we're going to have to remove that center console, and then we're going to snake the wiring up and run it up. And then you'll use a body clip tool like this to pop all the body rivets out. Now, if you damage these body rivets, you can buy these body rivets. You can buy a case of these at Harbor Freight for, I don't remember the prices, but they're pretty cheap. Now we're going to remove the back one. So I'll reposition you guys for that. Now we're going to do the same thing. Remove the torque heads. And then the body clips. And for these tools too, you can get these down at either Harbor Freight or Northern Tools if you have a Northern Tools near you. You may have to get plastic ones, but they'll do the same thing. I have plastic ones. These ones happen to be Mac tools, but there's really not a whole lot of difference. The Harbor Freight ones will work just as good. And just push those little rubber pieces in. Now just be a little cautious. There is an accessory plug over here. It is wired in. In this case, we're just going to set this over here for now. Now, I'm going to go ahead and run all the winch wiring through here. So the customer supplied his own wiring for this. The wiring that came in the kit is not long enough. So he supplied me with this. We're going to cut this up and we're going to crimp on new terminal ends and we're going to run them up. Unfortunately, though, he did not give me red and black. He just gave me this coil of red. So what we're going to do is we're going to run this and we'll just have to mark it so we know which one's which. Now we're going to snake it under here. We're going to stay along this current wiring because when we're all done, we're going to zip tie this all up to this wiring harness. On the newer models, it's kind of nice because there's like a little hole right here that comes up so you can run the wiring up here and out. On these older models, you're going to have to snake it underneath here like this. I'm not a huge fan of it because the drive shaft is right here. However, if we secure this properly, it should never be a problem. And as you can see, the wire is going to come up right here. We're going to leave that right there. We're going to definitely have some excess wiring, which is fine. I'll stick it right there for right now. It's obviously not connected to anything. We're all done. We're going to need a little excess because we're going to wind up zip tying it to a couple cross members and stuff like that. But we're going to go back here and just finish it off. Make sure it's all nice and neat and tucked in. And again, at this point, all we're doing is test fitting this. And now we're going to run the positive cable. And again, we're going to strip the end of the cable, take the insulation off. We're going to use red shrink wrap this time to indicate that this is the positive. And we're going to crimp on the terminal ends. Now, my next step is going to be to hook up the wiring to the box and install the box. Now, I haven't hooked any of these up to the batteries yet because I don't want any power to them while I'm doing this. And if you look at the bottom of the box, it's color coded. It's going to be your yellow wire, your blue wire, red for positive, black for ground. So I'm going to do that now. So I do give us these little rubber boots too to go over the wiring, which are aftermarket wiring is going to be a little harder. But if you cut off a little bit of the excess, it will go on. And this will help anything from making contact with the wiring while it's in the machine. So like I said, we're going to put our black on our black. Put that little boot over it. Red on red. And we're going to do the same thing for the blue and yellow wires. Now these two wires are going to run to your winch. And the reason I'm putting these on now, it'll be easier to do now than it will after that box is installed. The only other thing to be installed in the box is going to be this wiring harness, which we're going to plug in later. All right, now the box is ready to be installed. I'm going to feed that wiring in. We're going to reroute that wiring later. We're just getting it down in the hole for now so that we can start buttoning some of this stuff up. Now we got our control box on it and we have our wiring set up there so it's easy to get to. Now there's several ways to fasten all this stuff in, but the best way is to use zip ties. Well, it's the easiest way, not necessarily the best. So we're going to go through now is we're going to zip tie all this wiring up, and then we're going to connect our blue and our yellow wires to our winch. So next we're going to hook up our power cables to our winch. If you look on this side, we'll have yellow, and this side we'll have blue. And we're just going to go ahead and we're going to zip tie these all the way up through. Same thing with these coming down. We're going to zip tie all this up, and then I'll show you what it looks like when we're done. So my next step is going to be to secure my wiring so we don't get any chafing or it doesn't get caught into anything else. And you're just going to kind of want to go around and zip tie it up to other things in the cab, just so it's not going to touch. So we're going to be installing a breaker into this unit. You could install a fuse. I like the breakers a little bit better because if they do trip, they're easily resettable. What size breaker you're going to use is going to be dependent on your winch. So you're going to want to look up the rating that you need for the winch that you've installed. In this case, we use a 150 amp breaker. And the reason we're putting a breaker or an inline fuse in here, even though we secured these lines up, if they rub, this will, and there's a short, this should trip before, you know, your machine catches on fire, you have another issue. Or if you have an issue with the winch, potentially, hopefully it'll save something. Now we're going to install it right here. I'm going to use some tap cons to do the installation. So our main line's going to run up, and if you look, it will say load side. So we're actually going to mount it this way, and battery side. So we're going to jump over with the battery to here, and then we're going to put this wire here. Now we're going to make a jumper wire to go from our battery to our breaker switch, and then we'll wire this in directly, and then we'll go back up and we'll finish the wiring up front. Now I have a bit of concern about this wiring chafing here. So I have this swivel mount, which I'm going to zip tie. I'm going to wind up zip tying this in and then zip tying this to here. So this way that I don't have to worry about any chafing, because this sharp edge could create chafing in the wiring. So the first thing I'm going to do is zip tie it to the cross member. This will keep this positive battery cable off of that cross member. Now you can do several different ways to do this. You can just put a piece of rubber hose here if that's what you feel comfortable with, or any which way you want, depending on the application. And your application that you're going to mount this, it may not even be an issue, but in this application it is, and I really just don't want any chafing to go on there. So I'm just going to secure this battery cable like this, and I don't have to worry about this chafing up against that. Now just cut the excess off. And we don't have to worry about that. And all right. So now we're going to get ready to mount our switch and run our wiring for our switch. And the first thing we have to do is find the placement that we want for our switch. Now, in this case, we want it to be close to the operator. As you can see there, we have a couple switches here. We don't want to put it on this side, so the next available spot's going to be right here. Now, I have found the best way to cut these out is to heat them up and then use a razor knife to cut them out, which is what I'm going to do now. On some models, you may have the ones that pop out, which are a lot nicer, but if you don't, this is the next best thing. Now, even if you're opening and they're perfect, it's not going to matter because the trim around your switch is going to cover up a lot of that. But as you can see, that made a nice little hole right there. That cut like butter. So when you look at our switch, we have 2 wires running to the control board, and this is going to run to ground, and then this is going to run to the positive. So in our case, we want to do a key on power here. So we're going to go over up to the bulkhead here and see which terminal is key on power and what's ground. So the next thing we need to do is test this. Now, if you look behind here, you'll see this says accessory, this says ground, and this says battery. However, we want to test this to verify it because as much work has been done to this machine, we're not sure if that's accurate or not. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to test here. I got ground, ground, and that is indeed battery. I'm going to turn the key on. And now we have battery here, which is showing that this is the key on power. And that's what we're going to want to work off. So we're going to put a ground on and a key on power. Now, I would prefer to use red and black wiring. I ran out of black. I called the owner of the vehicle and I asked him what he wanted me to do. And he said, just use the yellow for ground for now and just run it that way. So that's what we're going to do for now. It is pretty embarrassing. I ran out of black, but that is what it is. If you remember this wiring from earlier, this is where we took our switch off. We're actually going to snake this wiring through here, and then we're going to run all this together up to the switch. So now that we have our wire fed through the loom, what we're going to do is we're going to put 2 connectors on the end so we can hook them into the terminals, and then we're going to snake them through the bulkhead there. So now that we have that done, we're not quite going to hook these up yet because we have these loose ends just flopping around. So what we're going to do is we're going to feed these through the rubber grommet right there in the firewall, and then we're going to hook it up on that side. So now we have our wiring up here brought through. We have our positive, our ground, and our 2 control wires. So our next step is going to be to cut off our excess wiring. Again, nothing's hooked up at this point. Get rid of all that. Then we're going to crimp these terminals on. So we're strip and crimp terminals on both, all 4. Now remember, our yellow is our ground and our positive is red. So I'm going to slide some tubes of shrink wrap up here and I'll show you why later, but it'll make sense when I'm done. Now, since we don't know which wire is which, I'm going to test these lightly just to see which wire is which. Because the book didn't specify for this setup. So now we've tested that, we're going to fully seat these. And so why I put the shrink wrap up here is I like to put shrink wrap over these because I don't trust that water's not going to get in there and corrosion's not going to set in. So I just put the shrink wrap up here. I figure if you ever got to disconnect this, it's easy enough to just cut the shrink wrap away and then disconnect it. So now I gotta slide this back in the hole. Now while I was testing it, I had this plugged in, but I wanted to show you that I was plugging it in. So you're gonna need to connect that, but you're really gonna need to connect that before you do your testing. And when I was doing my testing, I just lightly set the terminals up here just to make sure they would work. So now I'm gonna permanently mount these. Now I have a couple things left in here to zip tie up, and then I'm not going to put anything back together, but that pretty much concludes our winch install. Thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.